Christina. Thank you for coming to our third presentation in the Fanshawe Create Speaker Series. Our third presenter is also one of the organizers of this speaker series, Jeff Douglas, and he will be talking about destruction as creativity, beauty in decay, and I can see that he has a very interesting subtitle there that we're seeing for the first time today.
That was not approved ahead of time.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. So I hope you enjoy Jeff's presentation and all the treats.
Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for coming. I know it's a really busy time of year, and thanks for taking the extra time out of your schedules to be here. And thanks for Duru and Christina for asking me to present here. I have a lot of fun when I show my various images of garbage and decay and vomit and whatnot. So, and just another disclaimer, there will be some depictions of various bodily excreta. So anybody who's a little bit squeamish about that stuff, well, you've already been exposed, so I think you're okay then. And when we're thinking about Fanshawe Creates, we're trying to interrogate the creative process, and I can think of no better analogy than excreta, or the act of purging. So if we go back to, of course, Aristotle, who talks about the creative act being a sort of catharsis. The connection that I would make to that is that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about has something to do with things that happened in my youth that have still sort of drawn out a creative process today. So that act of going back to your youth and kind of drawing upon it as part of the creative process is sort of this cathartic experience of purging all of these different emotions. Also, I should talk about the subtitle a little bit. It's subtitled, yes, being an academic and creative jackass, because I think that sort of summarizes my approach to, or a little bit of my artistic taste. So a lot of what I do, it has a very, strange aesthetic merit to it. But I also like to be a little bit ironic and satirical with some of my subject matter. So I'll explain in a little bit further as I get into the presentation itself. But I could sum up my taste in aesthetic subject matter or artistic subject matter by just thinking about that which draws the eye. That's it. That which catches your attention. That which gives you has that look again function to it. So it doesn't have to be traditionally beautiful or well wrought or mastered. It just has to be something that catches your attention. So just to talk a little bit first about some of this stuff, I wanted to just preface it with some of my most recent creative pursuits. So I've been working with a group of colleagues and with some people here even at Fanshawe on with a small press or a small sort of arts collective or artistic collective called Blank Space Publications, and we've been just working with writers to create various media that tries to hit a middle ground, or that sort of sweet spot between popular culture and something with like quality to it. So not a lot of popular culture actually necessarily has that quality. So we're trying to kind of find this middle ground, and we started it back in 2012, or it was basically established back in 2012. And we're looking pretty much for projects that appeal not only to that popular audience, but that translate well to other media. So we've done a few books now we try to keep in mind having projects that might turn into film, music, even apps or games. So it is kind of like started as a press, like an indie press, but it's I want to think about having it evolve beyond that to something that has artistic merit in some degree. So that could involve video games, it could involve any sort of artistic production. Just to give you a sense of some of the stuff that we've done. This is one of the first books, images from one of the first books that we did, called The Big Book of Nightmares and Childhood Fears. Basically, I took I collaborated on this with an artist named Carolyn Deneen, who lives in the UK, and an editor named Sarah Dolson, who I went to McMaster with. And basically we came up with an idea where I took pretty much every nightmare or weird, bizarre, sadistic nightmare I had as a child and turned it into a story. So these are a representation of some of the typical nightmares that children might have. Some of you may recognize some of these yourself. I don't know if anybody had the nightmare of being eaten. It doesn't even have to be baked into a pastry, but even like just being eaten by something, that's like a typical childhood fear that probably comes from our time when we actually had to evade predators, and it's sort of residual unconscious memory that we have of that. Fears, I used to have weird dreams of like squirrels turning vicious or rabbits turning vicious and like attacking you. So, and this is apparently a typical nightmare that children have, of the harmless creature turns menacing, and that's one that I had. The thing under the stairs, or the thing in the basement. Did anybody have dreams of like the thing in a basement or an attic space or that dark crawl space that you couldn't see? Just various bizarre creatures. And the main picture, I used to have this intense fear of vomiting when I was a child, and I used to have these nightmares about it. And apparently this is an actual phobia. But this is something that I used to have this nightmare of all these kids in a room basically puking on each other all night. So there it is, represented in ink. And of course the weird, like, kids have like this love-hate relationship with poop. The toilet, that's sort of like an offshoot of the toilet training, I think, period. So that was sort of another typical nightmare. It's all in book form if you want to take a look at it. A couple of other ink drawings that Carolyn Deneen did. One is of a giant just eating a child, and the other is, this is a scene of a young child named Mushroom Boy who's wandering in a forest and gets attacked by these rabbits with translucent skin. So you can see all their veins and internal organs, and then they shoot the spray out of their mouths that devours the skin, and you can sort of see his face is dissolving there. So yeah, this is a children's book. So for those of you who want to get a nice Christmas present for that son, daughter, niece, or nephew, keep this in mind. Anyway, there you go. The other project that I wanted to talk about, there is a connection that I have between this and some of what I'm going to talk about today. So the newest project called, I call it the Arcade Project, but it stemmed from a story that I've been working with called Bob's Arcade for many years. And it's basically, it's going back to the 90s arcade scene as there's been a lot of work done on video games recently, so those of you who've looked up academic essays on video games, there's lots of stuff out there. But I haven't seen anything yet on about stories or even academic work exploring the arcade in the 90s as a cultural and artistic and even political space. So if you think about it, my argument is that some of these scenes in these arcade scenes in the mid-90s were sort of like the salons of the 1990s, where people got together and basically talked about extremely revolutionary, controversial ideas, even if it was just stuff about breaking the law. And so this is my new project, is exploring this sort of space as that cultural and artistic space is now sort of bygone. So arcades don't really exist in North America as they once did. So it's kind of, we can do a post-mortem on it now just to see what they actually represented. But there is a connection that I have to this. Not only this project, but I did grow up in a small town, and so part of my project is representing this in sort of a story, so what the arcade meant growing up in a small town. And I have a video clip that some of you in the room may have seen. If you're in my Haunted Landscapes course, it's not going to be a surprise to you. But growing up in a small town, it was pretty boring. We didn't have a lot to do. This is pre-internet also. So here's a little video though. It was published by the Canadian Film Centre that represents in about a minute or a minute and a half what it was like just kind of hanging out growing up in a small town. Let's see if this works. ask me later. So it's called Here the Crow Starves, Porking at Jackson Pollock. Got the sound. Goes on like this. There we go. It's nice to see that on the big screen. It's great. The sound, I think, is really good the echo.
Did you make all those sounds, Jeff?
My girlfriend did. I told her I was going to say that too. No, the expectorant noises were by yours truly. So it was quite a feat of sound engineering. Anyway, so because we didn't have much to do growing up in a small town, except sitting around and standing around saving up like saliva, we ended up getting into a little bit of trouble. And some of that trouble had to do with entering abandoned buildings for kind of a pastime. So that's basically something that, growing up in a small town, many people will have that experience of the abandoned buildings. And actually, seeing buildings decaying. And I'm just going to read a little portion from Bob's Arcade. This is actually in Bob's Arcade, and I actually talk about these sort of local haunts that children go to, these abandoned sort of spaces. So this is from the story, and it's written by a 15-year-old. It's supposed to be written from a 15-year-old's perspective. So anyway, that's the voice of the narrator. So, and the town is called The Hole. So there are tons of abandoned buildings like that around the Hole. Most of them boarded up with the no trespassing signs we ignore. There's the abandoned railway station with the old rail cars that sit unused in the lot. There's the garage behind the hotel, which is a sort of second hideout for us when we get chased out of the shed. There's the old public school that became a furniture store that became a shagging den because after the furniture store closed up for good, the owner left behind a lot of nice comfy couches. There's the water tower, which isn't abandoned, but is still a cool place to go get baked because it has a good view, the old farmhouse on the edge of town, the car graveyard. We have an endless supply of places to get toasted and hang out, except the farmhouse on the edge of town isn't there anymore. It got leveled pretty soon after we set it on fire. So, again, it gives you a little bit of a sense of sort of the idea, not only of kind of growing up in a small town with this sort of new, this arcade scene in the 90s, but also the kind of a delinquency involved with entering these kind of illicit spaces in a way. So these are my origins, and it's sort of interesting. This is my connection. That it's sort of interesting that me entering these abandoned buildings as a person, as a 15-year-old, and doing, just looking at all the stuff in them, like picking up old books and old, other, items and kind of wondering about who lived there and what these items represent. That led me to studying garbage in rural environments for 5 years and being funded by you, the taxpayer, to do so. So this is an image of one of the first images, not first images, one of the early images I took in an abandoned house. And it was just recently displayed at the Ontario Science Centre in March. And I think it offers sort of that representation of the aesthetic, kind of the aesthetic that I would have experienced as even a young man just entering these illicit spaces. Anyway, before I really get into though what the significance of this is and what the significance is of seeing just a chair sitting in front of a door in front of a decaying farmhouse, I need to talk to you about this rock. This rock right here. Tell me about this rock. Haunted landscapes people, you're not allowed to. They've seen this before. What's significant about this rock? This is audience participation time.
Was it photoshopped in after the fact?
No, there's no photoshopping going on here.
It's the only rock?
It's the only rock. Ah, so it's the only rock in an expansive field. So just to help me along, some questions. Why would anyone take a picture of a rock in a field? How did the rock get there? Why was it left? Who cares? Who cares about this rock in a field? What does it represent? I may have to call upon my haunted landscapes people now to see if they remember. Some other questions. So the title of this is an actual photograph from 1908 by Edward Sheriff Curtis, who photographed the American frontier. And he took a picture of this rock, and it called it the Mythic Stone. And you can tell possibly by the name that there's some, like, why would you call this the Mythic Stone? So the name gives it some sort of human agency and significance. But also, you know, why would somebody cart, like, an early 1900s box camera with the blackout curtain and everything out to the middle of nowhere and take a picture of this rock? So there's the other significance to it, the human agency behind it. Somebody felt that this rock was so significant that they had to go all the way out there and do that.
You know, in I Heart Huckabees, there's that poem in appreciation of nature. It goes, "You rock, rock."
Oh, you rock. Oh, jeez. Well, I didn't think about it that way, but I'm sure that Edward Sheriff Curtis back in 1908 was probably thinking that exact phrase. You rock. Yes, wait, Roy and then, or whoever had, yeah.
Had someone told him it was significant?
Possibly, yes. How can you discern that or ascertain that?
Well, when I first saw it, I thought, well, it's only significant if you think it's significant, you give it some significance. And when you put a Curtis's name, I wondered, is this the Curtis who published many photos of Native Americans?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
He's famous for making stuff up.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I wondered if somebody told him, oh yeah, this is important. So,
Yeah, and he went out and took a photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah. Corinne, did you?
Well, circa 1908, it's a heck of a lot easier to take a picture with a rock in the foreground than of anything living in the foreground.
Yes.
Those living things have to hold totally soft still.
That's
or
right,
else they'll
that's
be blurry.
Yeah, and what you would have had like the old like silver halide sort of techniques to photography back then, and would have been a lot more difficult. But Curtis did photograph Native Americans, and he did do a lot of that sort of photography in the frontier. Do you want to know the story behind this? Okay, here, let me read it for you. It's right here. I'll read. Okay. So. This has to do with the Hidatsa tribe, it's the Mythic Stone Hidatsa. So there is this sort of Native American significance to it. So this is what he says. A favorite myth of both tribes, and typically a Siouan one, is that which relates to the wonders performed by, I cannot pronounce that name. If anybody can help me, that would be great. But anyway. So it is a child of the sun and a woman who he had carried into the sky. Disobediently looking down at the earth through a hole left by a turnip root, she became homesick and lowered herself and the child to the earth by a cord of sinew. But the cord proving too short, they hung in the midair until the sun, discovering their absence, dropped a stone which struck the woman on the head. Her grip relaxed, she fell to the ground and was killed, but the boy was not harmed. He wandered into a garden whose owner, an old woman, adopted him and called him grandmother's child. The husband of this ogress was a water monster, and the first work of the wonderful boy was to kill it with arrows which the sun had given him and cast its body into a nearby lake which had been its home. Finding her foster son dangerous, the old woman sent him on many perilous quests that he might be killed, and thus he found opportunity to learn the haunts of many evil creatures, all of whom he destroyed. So all that from a rock in a field. And whether or not Curtis embellished or actually took some of the myths from the Native Americans that he photographed and interacted with, and then added to it, that's not the point. The point to me is the mythology that can be imbued in something like a simple stone by its seeming out of placeness in a field. So how did the rock get there? Why was it left? Was it left by glacial activity? If it was, I mean, well, what's the purpose behind imbuing any sort of mythic significance in it? So this is my segue. So this is where it all began. When before I applied to grad school to study garbage in rural environments, I happened upon this scene, which sort of sparked my own pursuit of these things that are kind of situated in a natural environment. You can tell I photoshopped a little bit, but this was basically, as you see, it was a mayonnaise jar sitting on a wooden pallet, a decaying wooden pallet, in a pasture, so in a grassland or a field. And seeing that sort of gave me that look again sort of response. Like, first of all, I was sort of used to seeing these scenes growing up in the country, but then being removed to the city for a few years, I came back and started to notice all these weird things, like of just everyday commodity objects being appropriated and put out of context. And then it made me think about what strange stories surround these actual objects as they're situated out of context. So I'll come back to this. I'll let you think about this a little bit, but these are some of the origins to where I started my pursuit to see what story does a mayonnaise jar sitting on a wooden pallet actually tell? Who cares, right? But that led me, though, to think about other objects as they've been situated in rural environments. So I did some more photography over the years, just to sort of get my catalog together, get my evidence. So as I was thinking about studying this in grad school, I actually started going out and wandering into the fields and getting other examples of this. So preservation and decay, just a refrigerator slightly ajar, in front of a barn that is also kind of caving in at the roof open here and open. So there's sort of this juxtaposition of openness. I don't know. Reflection of the interloper, you can sort of see this is more overt, again, sort of digitally manipulated, but this overt interruption of new technology into the landscape, but also juxtaposing older technology. So in this sense too, I mean, this is sort of our green, that we feel all nice and warm and fuzzy about pursuing these green activities, but I mean, we've been doing this for centuries. This old windmill technology has become new again. So, and this is sort of this representation of the old and the new with a cow. Also, just to show you that it's a rural landscape. And this is an interesting. I don't know if anybody's even seen this. When I've showed this image, some people will actually say, "Oh, I know where that is." It's on the way to, if you pass through Hamilton on County Road 6, on the way to Guelph or Waterloo. There's just some farmer who has a Toronto streetcar sitting out on his farm property, stuffed with leaves. It's just stuffed with leaves, and you can just ask yourself the question. I mean, why would somebody go to all that trouble to put a streetcar out on their property, mow the lawn around it, and all of that, and stuff it full of leaves? And I don't know. Anyway, why would somebody go to all the trouble of even getting in their car and pulling over on the side of the road and trespassing on this person's property and entering said streetcar to take a photograph like this out of the back? So rear view of a Toronto streetcar. I just walked into it. I should say I was walking onto the property to ask for permission to enter the streetcar. However, while I was on the property, I sort of deviated and sort of into the
Did it
streetcar.
anyways.
Yeah, so there is a legal loophole, and I explored this with my dissertation, and I've told my students about it too. You are allowed to enter a property to ask for permission to enter a property. I know it's a paradox, but it exists in law, so it's enshrined in law. So if you're ever on one of these properties, you may be there to ask for permission. And who's to say, maybe there isn't a door on the house that you're going to knock on the door to ask for permission. Maybe that door is missing and you just happen to trip inside the house, and anyway, be careful. This is this is one of my other photos that I've exhibited quite a few times and that I had published in Query magazine. And it sort of represents this idea of what I'm trying to get at about the ideal of a certain sort of decay aesthetic versus what we actually get nowadays because of the interruption of commodity culture. So when you look at this image, you may see that it actually has a sort of melancholic sort of beauty to it. I don't know, am I wrong? Maybe? Or is it just like gross? Like this is totally just a total aversion to this image. Well, what do you see? What do you think? What do you actually see in this image that might fulfill a sort of an aesthetic? I don't know, an aesthetic of decay that is actually appealing. Anything? I mean, there is a piano in it decaying. I mean, does that not provoke any kind of a response? Yeah. So just abandonment in general. But I mean, even like to me, I took the photo because I thought the piano. I was like, ooh, this is, melancholic, and this tantalizes my sensibilities, regarding decay. So the piano was the obvious thing for me. Yeah, Roy?
I was just going to say, I could just imagine a scene like that coming upon it, and I could you'd be looking at it, you'd think, I don't want to mess with this, like I don't want to, you don't want to move anything around, you don't want to disturb it somehow.
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is how it has become like a museum, these places. But you don't want, I go in and I should say, there's an urbex or an urban exploration sort of is a thing that people do where they're going through Detroit and different places and they're exploring all these abandoned buildings and factories. And a lot of these people work according to this philosophy where they say, they'll remember in the Haunted Landscapes course, so take only photographs, leave only footprints. You're not supposed to disturb anything. And when I go into a scene like this, and this is sort of revisiting like an old decaying farmhouse, you see a piano, and you see, you can see some books, and there's this nice open window with some weeds or some vines that are starting to invade from the outside. But then, this is my whole issue. What do you do with this? What do you do with this edition courtesy of the Pepsi Corporation? Did anybody notice that? Yeah, so if you look in the photograph when I have it displayed, you can see it stands out a little bit more. But not only does this speak to this idea, as Roy was saying, that you go into this place and you don't want to disturb something, but it shows that people are going into these places, that they're actually visiting these sites of decay, and that they're actually taking this interest in wandering around a house with this decaying piano. And when I first took this photograph, I wanted to take this nice, sweet picture of like this melancholic, like, oh, it's so sad, piano that's decaying in front of a window and books, everything that we would maybe attribute to a classical version of the picturesque. And then when I saw the photograph afterwards, I saw that Pepsi can in there. I almost wanted to go back and like just kick it out of the way and just to get that photograph without the Pepsi can in it. But then I thought, this is actually my project, that this is the new picturesque, this is the neo-picturesque that we have to deal with, that we have the interruption of these within scenes of decay of commodity culture. So we're just going to have garbage and trash that we're going to have to deal with as a part of our depiction of of picturesque melancholy. Yep.
But typically, it's that commodity culture that has resulted in this place being abandoned in the first place anyway. So it really actually contributes to the story that you're
Definitely.
telling visually.
I mean, there are layers of stories and narratives that surround these places. And for those of you, I mean, I wrote on this for 300 pages. So I did a lot of research. Robert Frost, I mean, if those of you know Robert Frost, he actually has many, a lot of poems that are unknown about him just doing this very thing, wandering, basically breaking and entering into houses in order to wander around and look at old books. Look at what the inhabitants left behind, and sort of analyzing what story or what narrative it tells about the absent inhabitants. And this is sort of what we're dealing with now. Is like, what story does this tell of the greater effect, but also what stories what story does this soda can tell of somebody wandering through this space? Yeah.
Well, why is it just one commodity culture?
Mm-hmm.
Layers.
Oh, I know, there are layers. I mean, the books are a part of commodity culture as well. The piano, definitely, it would have been, it may have been made in the 1800s, or early 1900s, but it would have been part of a commodity culture. So there are layers to it, and then, so what we get is a layering effect.
So why did we call the one layer melancholy?
Yeah. That's exactly my question that I tried to determine over 300 pages when I wrote my dissertation, is why is this rejected as a part of the picturesque? And it typically is. So we can take this whole scene. Now, when I've displayed these photographs, people will actually come up to me and talk to me about, they'll go on about their sort of aesthetic interpretation. And I get these responses that, oh, if only that soda can wasn't in the picture, this would have been beautiful. And I'm saying, well, we have to deal with this. This is the reality now, that we have this part of commodity culture that is going, or new sort of manufacturing, mass manufacturing culture that's being infused in these traditional ideas of the picturesque, or traditional ideas of how we might find a ruin beautiful. Yes?
This really kind of goes back though to, traditional still life. It's typically not just bowls of fruit. It often would include, take from the hunt, a dead rabbit on the table along with the fruits and vegetables.
Yeah. Yes.
This is really just a modern form of still life. And there are quite a number of other variants on that. Apparently, Andrew Wyeth used to have permission from his neighbors to go in and into their houses in the middle of the night while they were sleeping and sketch and paint them.
Oh, wow.
So like there are a lot of different ways of approaching that idea of sort of still unaware. I don't know. It is kind of a variant on the still life.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that whole sneaking into the house and capturing people's lives while they're sleeping, because this is essentially what I'm doing, except the inhabitants are not there anymore. There is, and I've talked about this, there is a voyeuristic quality to doing this, that you're invading a space that people didn't necessarily want you to invade. That when you go through these houses, sometimes there are still old clothes hanging in the closet. I've been in houses that have like an old wedding dress from the 1940s hanging up in the closet. And I mean, these are spaces that even though the inhabitants aren't present, you're still sort of voyeuristically looking in at their lives, and that wasn't necessarily their intent. Yeah. So, just to for the sake of time, I wanted to get to the part about the jackasser. So, part of what I do is I like to when I display these photographs. I've talked to a lot of different people about their opinions, and a lot of people will talk to me about the raw aesthetic quality to it. So the juxtaposition of light, the contrasts and various colors and whatever, and what makes it an aesthetic object. And some of my subject matter, though, when you actually look and peel back the layers, has sort of an underlying sort of a viscerality to it that can take people aback. So when you see this image here, what do you see? For those of you who know, don't say. So we have does anybody know what that is? So it's a collection of plastic milk jugs just sitting in a big crate, on a farm, and there's a barn and farm and shadow there. It's representing shadowness. Anyway, when people will come up to me at exhibitions sometimes, they'll say, I really like, this dark, the dark juxtaposing the red really is the focal point, and the white working with the blue of the sky, and then also I'll turn to them and say, yeah, those are piss jugs. Those are actual, they were filled with urine, because sometimes in the winter, the plumbing would freeze, and so the person had to actually use these jugs, and now they for a toilet, and now here they sit in all their eminence. But please do go on again about the color and the aesthetic qualities of the picture. And so I've had these moments where I display these images where people will talk about the aesthetics of it, but then I say, when I tell them what the image actually really is and what it represents, does it still have that aesthetic quality now that you know that these jugs were filled with urine? Yes? No? I'll leave that with you. Anyway, this is published in the Torontoist, so you can go see it there, and Filling Station. I don't think the Torontoist knew what the jugs were used for, but anyway. All right, so just full circle. I was going to end with a little contest. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but so just coming back to this image dead stock removal, if anybody can guess what the story is behind this mayonnaise jar sitting on a wooden pallet, I will give you, I have some posters here, and I've got a book of nightmares. So if anybody can guess the story even closely related to this mayonnaise jar, why this mayonnaise jar was sitting on a wooden pallet, what enigma it reveals, then you'll get yourself some posters or a book. What do you think? By the way, I should say, this demonstrates the significance of mayonnaise jars in literature. This is just an excerpt from Richard Brautigan's Trout Fishing in America, where he talks about people appropriating tin cans and mayonnaise jars in the graveyards of the poor, and using them to put flowers in. There is this, and this was written back in, I think, 1960, this idea of appropriating commodity culture or sort of like even disposable culture and then using it for another purpose, even something as profound as leaving flowers on somebody's gravesite is basically...
Well, think of the coffee can in Lebowski, right?
Yes, yes, very nice. Anybody want to take a guess why this was left?
I don't know
Yeah.
why it was left, but I was wondering, does it have like someone's ashes in it or something, or?
Wow, that's
Like-
morbid. No,
Well,
not that
yeah,
far.
about
You're
the
getting there. You're getting
headstones
close. You're getting
Okay.
close. Yes.
I'm gonna guess that it's used for like a marker, or they used it for other things.
There was a marker of something,
Like
perhaps.
maybe-
Yes.
Yeah, like Mrs. Paper or something.
It is called dead stock removal. It's what's dead stock mean? It's the opposite of livestock. Nobody? Okay, well, I mean, some of you were close enough. It's actually the story behind this. Here's the layers of the story. So there was a livestock, a cow, I think, that died. And the dead stock removal people apparently were coming to collect it. So there are these people who go in trucks and collect dead livestock. In order to cover the animal up, the farmer put a tarp over the animal, which is not pictured, and put the pallet over top of the tarp so it wouldn't blow away and people driving by wouldn't be horrified by a dead animal laying in the field. Then he used and appropriated a mayonnaise jar and put a check inside to pay the dead stock people for removing the animal. The dead stock people came, picked everything up, took the animal, put the empty mayonnaise jar back on the wooden pallet, and there it sat in a field. Yeah, there you go. Anyway, pretty morbid. And for those of you who are interested in pursuing this activity, I do have to warn you, do watch out for various dangers. This is something that I came across while I was exploring rural properties. I came across this hole that was covered over in grass, and I sort of kicked it away and discovered it was an open well.
Oh, good.
So yeah, I may not have been here to actually present had I taken a few extra steps. So anyway, thank you very much for having me. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and again, thanks. This is great to be part of this.
Yeah.